Every dawn, before the harbor shops unlocked and before the gulls gathered on the pilings, Finn walked to the same door of the old fog signal shed and sat with his nose pointed at the latch. Jonah Reed told himself it was only habit. The dog liked routine, and the shed smelled of salt, rope oil, and old wood. But on the fifth morning, Finn did something different. He turned away from the door, faced the empty harbor, and lifted one paw when the wind shifted. Jonah had been a Navy signalman long enough to know a repeated signal deserved an answer. The lighthouse keeper's cottage came with a leaking gutter, a narrow bed, and a view that made strangers stop their cars on the shoulder. Jonah had not bought it for the view. He had rented it for the quiet. After years of reading flags, lamp sequences, weather bulletins, and harbor routines from tidy Navy watchrooms, a cottage with peeling trim at the edge of a Maine harbor seemed simple enough. The town of Greyhaven treated the lighthouse like an old photograph. People admired it, argued about its paint color, and used it on postcards. But hardly anyone climbed the hill unless visitors were in town. The light itself had been automated long ago. The fog signal shed, a low building with a rusted roof and a padlocked door, had not been used in years. Locals called it the Horn House, usually with a shrug. On Jonah's first evening there, his landlord, Maris Bell, handed him 2 keys and a list of cottage rules. She ran the chandlery beside the wharf and spoke with the brisk kindness of someone who had learned not to waste tide time. "The brass key is for the cottage," she said. "The iron key opens the side gate to the lighthouse path. Do not worry about the shed. It sticks, and there is nothing useful inside." Finn, standing beside Jonah's left knee, looked toward the hill as if disagreeing politely. Finn was a sandy-coated dog with dark ears, steady eyes, and the particular talent of making silence feel occupied. Jonah had adopted him after leaving the Navy because mornings were easier when someone expected them to begin at the same time. Finn knew the difference between Jonah's busy quiet and Jonah's drifting quiet. When Jonah's thoughts scattered, the dog pressed his shoulder against Jonah's leg and waited until breathing found a rhythm that skill mattered more than any trick. Their first dawn walk should have been ordinary. Jonah carried coffee in a travel mug. Finn led up the gravel path, and the harbor below shifted from gray to blue at the top. Finn sniffed the lighthouse door, passed it, and went straight to the fog signal shed. He sat, not excited, not tense, simply placed himself at the latch, as if waiting for Jonah to unlock a morning assignment. "Not our building," Jonah said. Finn glanced back, then touched the bottom board with his nose. Jonah had spent too much of his life trusting small signals to ignore that completely. He walked around the shed. The back wall faced the water. The seaward side held 2 round vents, both screened and crusted with salt. The ground near one corner was worn into a shallow crescent, though no one had reason to stand there now. A row of flat stones led from the shed to a flagpole base, then down toward the old keeper's path. It could have been a tourist habit from years ago. It could have been nothing. But Finn returned the next morning, and the next, and the next. By the 4th dawn, Jonah brought a notebook. He wrote the time, wind, direction, tide state, and Finn's behavior, because old habits can be useful when emotions are not. North breeze. Dog sat at shed harbor, still. Low tide. 5th dawn. East breeze. Dog sat, then faced harbor. 6th dawn. Bog bank offshore. Dog did not sit, walked to flagpole base instead. Jonah stared at that 6th note longer than he expected. Finn had changed the route, only when the weather changed. The town was waking by then. A bakery light came on. Maris lifted the awning at the chandlery. A fisherman named Theo Vale checked lines on a small workboat and raised one hand toward Jonah. Everything below looked settled, yet Jonah could feel the hill holding a question. He asked Maris about the shed after breakfast. "Old signal equipment," she said, sorting coils of line behind her counter. Some charts, probably. A cracked bench, maybe bird feathers. The town keeps saying it will restore the place, then the budget gets practical. Why was it locked? To keep curious visitors from collecting souvenirs. She looked at Finn, who was sniffing a display of rope. Or curious dogs from becoming local historians. Jonah smiled. Did the signal routine ever matter after automation? Maris paused. My father thought it did. He said the keeper recorded more than fog, wind, tide, harbor, traffic, festival days, all sorts of patterns. But my father thought every old habit had a use if you waited long enough. In the shed, if they were not moved? Why? Jonah considered giving a simple answer, then chose the honest one. Finn keeps reporting to the door. Maris leaned over the counter to look at the dog. Does he now? That afternoon, she walked up the hill with Jonah and a can of oil. The shed lock resisted, then opened with a metal sigh. Inside, the air smelled of dust, cedar, salt, and old engine grease. Light fell through the vents in pale stripes. Against one wall sat a long workbench. Above it hung faded signal flags, their colors dulled but still readable. A cabinet leaned in the corner. Stacked wooden boxes carried labels in careful block letters. Lenses, ledgers, bulbs, parade cloth, tied cards. Finn stepped inside, sniffed once, and went directly to the workbench. He placed his nose under the left drawer. Maris folded her arms. That dog has opinions. Jonah opened the drawer. Inside were cloth packets, a brass whistle, a pencil stub, and a notebook wrapped in oilcloth. The cover read, Morning, Signal Log, 1978 to 1986. Jonah did not open it right away. He felt, unexpectedly, like he had been handed someone else's rhythm. Navy signal work had taught him that a log was more than a list. It was a person's promise that the next watch would not have to begin blind. The first pages were practical. Date, time, wind, vecity, tiber notes, condition, flag condition, harbor notes. Jonah scanned entries while Maris read over his shoulder. Many were plain. Clear dawn, west wind, 4 boats out, festival bunting, dry. Others had little marks in the margin. A triangle, a circle, or a slash. On certain June mornings, the keeper had drawn a small star beside east wind clearing by 9. Greyhaven days used to be in June, Maris said quietly. Used to be. Still is technically, but it has been shrinking. Wrong weekends, bad turnout, vendors frustrated, people blame parking, online, shopping, all the usual things. Jonah turned another page. The 11th of June, east wind at dawn, fog lifting seaward, clear harbor by 8:40. The 18th of June, south wind holding damp, postpone bunting, low foot traffic until noon. The 25th of June, north shift by 7. Best flag was not only weather, it was memory tied to timing. For the next week, Jonah and Finn climbed the hill each morning with purpose. Jonah compared the old entries with current conditions. Finn followed his own pattern, sometimes sitting at the shed, sometimes walking to the flagpole, sometimes stopping at a flat stone halfway down the path with a view open toward the wharf. Jonah marked every stop. Soon the stops began matching the log's old observation points, the shed for wind and air, the flagpole for visibility, the pathstone for harbor reflection. The dog was not solving a puzzle in a human way. He was following scent, wind, routine, and the emotional attention Jonah gave each place, but that was enough. A good partner does not need to know the whole map to lead you back to the next mark. Jonah took copies of 3 log pages to Maris. She read them in the chandlery while a customer compared 2 anchor lines nearby. My father used to say the festival failed when we stopped listening to the hill, she said. Did anyone write that down? Probably in a town meeting nobody enjoyed. That gave Jonah the next clue. Town meeting minutes were kept in the back room of the library, which occupied the second floor above the post office. The librarian, Mr. Keene, loved two things: quiet and forms filled correctly. Jonah filled out a request slip and waited while Finn lay under the table, chin on paws. The minutes from the late 1980 seconds and early 1990 seconds arrived in 3 gray binders. The story unfolded in ordinary language. The keeper's daily report stopped. Greyhaven days moved to a fixed calendar weekend for convenience. The old weather notes were mentioned once, then tabled. Vendors complained that the chosen weekend often caught damp mornings, low visibility, or an awkward tide pattern that left the main wharf looking empty during peak visitor hours. No one had meant to weaken the festival. They had simplified it until the old local intelligence had nowhere to live. Jonah read the minutes twice. He knew that kind of simplification. A routine looks old-fashioned until the day people realize it had been carrying knowledge no report captured. The question became what to do with that knowledge, without sounding like a man who had spent 1 week in town and discovered everyone's problem. Jonah had no interest in becoming a lighthouse prophet. He made of square coal instead. Date, wind, at dawn, tide, time, visibility, old keeper note, vendor, comment, current observation. He added Finn's behavior in a final column, because leaving it out felt dishonest. You made my father's records a weather clerk. I made your father's records sociable. Same family, different uniform. Jonah winced at the word uniform, but Maris meant no weight by it. She caught the flicker anyway and softened her voice. I mean, you are doing what you know how to do. Finn pressed against Jonah's knee under the counter. Jonah rested his hand on the dog's head until the room steadied. The first test came sooner than expected. Greyhaven's summer committee had planned a small harbor market for the first Saturday in June. It was not the Maine festival, just 12 tents, 2 food stalls, a boat maintenance demonstration, and Maris's annual rope splicing table. The forecast looked mixed. The committee debated whether to move the opening from 8 to 10. Jonah compared the old logs, the tie chart, and 3 current mornings. Finn, unhelpfully or perfectly, kept sitting at the flagpole base just after dawn whenever the east breeze pushed through. Jonah told Maris what the pattern suggested. The fog would hang low early, then clear fast. The harbor would look best at 9:30, not 8. The tide would turn just before 10, bringing enough movement along the wharf to make the place feel alive. You should tell the committee, Maris said. I have lived here 3 weeks. Then I will tell them, and they can be annoyed with me. They were not annoyed exactly. They were cautious. A retired accountant named Nella Pruitt asked whether this was science or nostalgia. Theo Vale asked if it mattered for a market that small. Mr. Keene asked whether the town's insurance form needed a revised time. Jonah answered only the parts he could answer. The pattern is not magic, he said. It is local observation. The keeper tracked mornings for years. If the records are right, 9:30 gives you a better opening window. Nella looked at Finn, who was sitting beside Jonah's chair with formal dignity. And what does the dog say? Jonah almost corrected her, then saw the edge of humor in her face. He votes for checking the wind before committing to a plan. The market opened at 9:30. At 8, fog softened the harbor into a gray wash. At 9:15, a thin blue line appeared beyond the breakwater. By 9:40, sunlight hit the shop windows. Flags lifted cleanly from the stalls and the wharf filled at a pace that made vendors smile before they admitted they were smiling. Theo's maintenance demonstration drew enough people that he ran it twice. Maris sold out of small rope key chains by 11. No one called it proof. That was good. Proof was for careful accumulation. But after the market, Nella asked Jonah whether he could bring the logs to the next committee meeting. Finn chose that moment to roll onto his back under Maris's table, accepting admiration from 3 shop owners as if public service was exhausting. The second test was less flattering, which made it more useful. A midweek art walk was scheduled for a Southold morning, and the old log suggested a later indoor start would work better than sidewalk tables. Bram ignored the advice and set pastries outside at 8 because he liked proving spreadsheets wrong. By 9, the damp air had softened the paper bags and chased customers indoors. Across the street, Maris kept her rope display inside and sold steadily to people waiting for the mist to lift. Bram came to the chandlery at 10 with a tray of rescued pastries and a face arranged for neutrality. Maybe there is something to the yellow flag. Maris took a pastry. Careful. That sounded like growth. Jonah wrote the outcome down without teasing him. The point was not to win an argument. The point was to make the next morning easier for everyone. Finn seemed to understand that better than any of them. He accepted a small, plain biscuit from Bram, then returned to his place beside Jonah's chair as if the town's dignity required restraint. The third test involved the harbor route. On a West Flat morning, the wharf looked bright from the road, but felt strangely empty up close. The tide sat wrong for easy foot traffic, and visitors tended to stop at the first row of stalls instead of moving along the water. The old ledger recommended opening the side lane first, drawing people past the boat repair shed and back toward the main street. Theo tried it with chalk arrows and 2 borrowed flags. By noon, vendors at the far end reported more steady visits than they had seen in 3 seasons. Those small tests did what one successful market could not. They turned a charming idea into a working habit. People stopped asking whether the Lighthouse routine was quaint and started asking which signal applied. That shift mattered to Jonah because useful systems do not need everyone to feel inspired. They need enough people to trust the next step. The deeper pattern emerged over the next month. The old keeper had marked 5 kinds of mornings: East Clear, South Hold, North Bright, West Flat, and Mixed. The terms were not official, but they were consistent. East Clear mornings began with mist that lifted quickly and made the harbor sparkle by mid-morning. South Hold mornings stayed damp and kept visitors indoors. North Bright mornings made flags visible from the road and brought people down early. West Flat mornings looked nice, but left the wharf strangely quiet because the tide and wind worked against the usual walking route. Mixed mornings required flexible starts. Jonah plotted the old festival dates against those patterns. The best attended ewes, according to newspaper clippings and vendor notes, had fallen on East Clear or North Bright weekends. The weakest years had often landed on South Hold mornings, especially when the tide pulled boats away from the main wharf at opening. It sounded small until Maris explained the economics. A slow first hour made vendors cautious. Cautious vendors brought less inventory the following year. Less inventory made visitors leave sooner. Shorter visits meant shops saw fewer spillover sales. The town did not lose its festival all at once. It let the opening hours shrink, then build expectations around the shrinkage. That was the part that hooked Jonah. The lighthouse had not been decorative. It had been a timing instrument for a town that lived by subtle changes. The next clue came from the path itself. Finn began stopping at the third bend below the shed, where a flat granite step faced both the flagpole and the main street. Jonah had walked over that stone a dozen times without noticing the 2 shallow holes drilled into its surface. Maris remembered a small wooden stand there when she was young. Keene found a photograph that showed a mirror mounted on the stand, angled toward the shop windows below. On bright mornings, the keeper could flash a clean signal down the hill before the flags were visible from the wharf. That sounded ornamental until Theo explained the old shopfront glass before newer signs and awnings. The Main Street windows caught the hill's reflection. A shopkeeper, wiping the counter at dawn, could see the glint and know the keeper was beginning the morning check. It was not a formal alert. It was a nudge. Start looking up. The day is taking shape. Jonah added mirror stand to the spare blout, then crossed it out because the spare lamb was becoming ridiculous. He created a second notebook instead, called Physical Cues. Finn's stops filled half the first page. Shed vent, path stone, lower gate, wharf corner. The dog had been mapping a communication system that once used sight, weather, footsteps, and habit together. Every time Jonah thought the route had ended, Finn found another practical point. One evening, Jonah tested the mirror theory with Maris. They borrowed a hand mirror from the cottage and climbed the hill at 6:30 when the shops were closed, but the western light still struck the water. Maris stood near the chandlery while Jonah held the mirror over the granite step. Finn sat beside him, very pleased with the seriousness of the experiment. On the third try, Maris raised both arms from the street below. The light had reached her front window exactly where the photograph suggested. It should not have moved Jonah as much as it did. It was only reflected light on glass. But it proved that the town had once built a language out of whatever the hill and harbor offered. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. Just people paying attention from their own doorways and trusting that someone else was paying attention too. After that, the work stopped. Feeling like Jonah's private curiosity, it became a reconstruction, not of the past for nostalgia, but of the practical links that had helped the town coordinate without dozens of calls, delays, and second guesses. Jonah made a rule for himself. Every old feature had to answer a current need. If it did not help people now, it could stay in the museum box. If it did, it deserved a modern version. There was resistance, because there is always resistance when old knowledge returns wearing new paperwork. A cafe owner named Bram said weather was too unpredictable to plan around. Nella worried about changing printed flyers. Theo liked the idea, but did not want the town blamed if the pattern failed. Keene requested a source note for every conclusion, which Jonah secretly appreciated. Jonah did not argue hard. He had learned that signals only worked when received. He prepared a one-page summary and left out anything that sounded grand. He called it Proposed Flexible Opening Windows for Greyhaven Days. Mary said the title could put a gull to sleep, but Nella approved because it sounded fundable. Finn added his own persuasion by becoming the committee's unofficial timer. During evening meetings, he rested near the door until Jonah's shoulders tightened, then crossed the room and leaned against him. People noticed the lean slowed Jonah's answers. It also slowed the room. Arguments that might have sharpened became questions. Questions became tests. Tests became assignments. By the end of June, the committee agreed to restore the old Lighthouse morning check for one season. That agreement left Jonah unexpectedly unsettled. He had wanted the town to take the evidence seriously, but once it did, the routine became visible enough to depend on him. Dependence had edges. He knew how quickly a helpful person could become a permanent fixture in a system that should belong to everyone. That night he sat on the cottage step while Finn watched moths move around the porch light. "We are not becoming the whole plan," Jonah told him. Finn leaned into his shoulder. "That is not an answer, but it was close." The answer was not to pull back, it was to build the handoff from the beginning. The next morning, Jonah changed the observation sheet. He added boxes for second observer, wharf confirmation, and shop confirmation. He wrote instructions plain enough for Bram to grumble through and Nella to audit. Then he asked Maris to perform the next dawn check, while he stood beside her and said as little as possible. Maris missed the first wind shift because she was looking at the water instead of the flag line. Theo misread a north bright morning because the road looked clear before the wharf did. Nella recorded everything correctly but held the pencil so tightly, the page nearly tore. None of that worried Jonah. Mistakes made during training were gifts if people wrote them down. By the end of the week, each of them had corrected one observation and trusted one observation from someone else. Finn adjusted too. At first, he kept returning to Jonah after each stop, as if reporting to the original handler. By the fourth volunteer morning, he sat beside Maris at the shed vent, then beside Theo at the pathstone, then beside Nella while she checked the tide chart. Jonah felt the small release in his chest when he saw it. The dog was not attached to Jonah, being the only person who understood. He was attached to the routine being done calmly. The assignment was simple. For 10 days before Greyhaven Days, Jonah would climb to the lighthouse at dawn, record wind, visibility, and tide notes, compare them with the keeper's pattern, and report a recommended opening window. Maris would verify from the wharf. Theo would verify from the waterline. Nella would manage vendor communications. Mr. Keene would archive every page so nobody could later claim. The system lived only in Jonah's head. Jonah liked that last part most. But the fog signal shed still held one locked cabinet. The cabinet stood behind the workbench. Paint flaked around its hinges with no key in the drawer or on Maris's ring. Finn ignored it for weeks. Then, on a damp July morning, he walked past the workbench and sat in front of the cabinet with his nose high, scenting the upper seam. Jonah tried the handle. It did not move. He checked the top, the sides, and the floor beneath it. Nothing. Maris arrived with coffee and found him kneeling in front of the cabinet. "Please tell me the dog did not promote you to locksmith." "He promoted me to person who asks if you have more keys." "She did not, but Mr. Keene did, in a way." The library held an old maintenance envelope from the Lighthouse Museum years, and inside was a key tagged signal flags, upper cabinet. The tag seemed wrong because the flags were hanging on the wall. Still, the key fit. Inside the cabinet were more flags, cleaner than the ones outside, wrapped in brown paper. Beneath them lay a narrow wooden tray divided into labeled compartments: red pennant, white square, blue repeat, yellow market, green clear. At the back was a card in the same hand as the logs. Festival signal set. Use from hill only after wharf confirms. Maris touched the card with one finger. "I remember those." Jonah waited. "Not clearly. I was young. My father would look up the hill before opening the shop. If the green flag was out, he moved the outdoor display to the sidewalk. Yellow meant wait. Blue meant later start. I thought it was just pageantry." The simple system had been visible all along, but once the person who understood it left the daily routine, the flags turned into decoration. This is where the story changed from restoring a festival to restoring trust. The town did not need Jonah to invent a new plan. It needed permission to believe an old routine had been practical, dignified, and worth updating. The committee approved a trial flag system for Greyhaven Days. Not the old signals exactly. They added text, alerts for vendors, and a small sign at the wharf for visitors. But the flags would fly from the lighthouse again, not as performance, but as a shared morning cue: green for opening on time, yellow for delayed setup, blue for harbor route first, white for indoor start. Red was removed because Nella said no one needed an anxious color over a craft fair. Jonah agreed more quickly than anyone expected. During the 10-day observation period, Finn became the town's dawn witness. Maris came twice. Theo came once with 2 coffees and said very little, which Jonah took as respect. Nella came with a clipboard and shoes not built for hill grass, then pretended she had planned for the dew. Mr. Keene came with a camera and labeled each photo before leaving the path. Every morning, Finn followed the same order: shed door, windward vent, flagpole base, path stone. Then he looked at Jonah. The dog did not know the town was testing a civic routine. He only knew that this was the work now, and work went better when humans stopped hurrying past the important smells. 2 days before Greyhaven Days, the forecast turned vague. The regional report showed a chance of morning fog, maybe clearing, maybe lingering. Vendors began tick-dang Maris. Bram at the cafe wanted to know how much pastry to make. Theo wanted to know whether to position his repair demonstration near the main wharf or the side lane. Nella wanted a decision by noon. Jonah climbed the hill, before sunrise with Finn. The air felt damp but moving. At the shed, Finn sniffed the lower vent, then did not sit. He walked to the flagpole, paused, then continued to the path stone and faced the harbor. Jonah checked the wind. East by northeast light, steady. The tide would turn mid-morning. The old logs marked similar mornings as east clear. Best start 9:15 to 9:45. But one detail unsettled him. The fog line offshore looked thicker than the old entries described. He wrote recommended flexible start. Vendors set up at 9. Public opening 9:45, unless wharf visibility improves. Sooner. Then he walked down to Maris. She read the note. That sounds like hedging in a better coat. Finn leaned into Jonah's leg before he could answer. Jonah looked at the harbor again. The air had begun to brighten in layers. 9:45 is honest, Maris nodded. The morning of Greyhaven days arrived gray enough to make Bram smug for 20 minutes. At 8, the wharf looked muted. Vendors set up slowly under yellow flag guidance, not panicked, not wasting energy, simply pacing themselves. At 9, the fog thinned. At 9:20, the lighthouse window caught the first clean shine of sun. Jonah stood by the flagpole with Finn while Maris radioed from the wharf. Visibility improving, shops ready. Theo says the harbor route looks good. Jonah raised the green flag at 9:40. Below, the town moved as one body that had remembered its joints. Stalls opened. The cafe line formed after the first bright patch hit the sidewalk. Visitors who had waited in cars walked down together instead of drifting away early. Theo's demonstration started with the tide turning behind him, which made every boat line and cleat easy to see. Maris sold practical gear to people who had first stopped for festival cloth. The library table handed out copies of the Old Keeper's Pattern Summary, and Mr. Keene corrected 2 people who called it a legend. By noon, nobody was calling the lighthouse. Useless. Jonah stayed on the hill longer than he meant to. Finn lay beside the flagpole, eyes half closed, the green cloth moving above them. From there, Jonah could see how each part connected: the cottage path, the shed vents, the flags, the wharf, the shops, the tide sliding in. None of it was dramatic on its own. Together it made timed up with a paper bag of sandwiches. She sat on the grass without asking whether Jonah wanted company. My father would have liked today, she said. Jonah looked at the shed. He kept good logs. You read them? Finn found them. Finn found the drawer. You followed through. Jonah accepted the sandwich because arguing with kindness made the air heavy. They ate while the festival noise rose and fell below them. The final reveal came after Greyhaven days, when Mr. Keene finished archiving the signal shed materials and found a thin ledger behind the flag tray. It was not a weather log. It was a shop ledger from several seasons of festivals, with notes from different business owners. Extra bread after green flag. Move flowers outside on North Bright. Delay boat polish. Display on South Hold. Open side lane when tide turns after 10. The handwriting changed from page to page. The lighthouse routine had never belonged to the keeper alone. It had been a town conversation conducted through observations, flags, and small acts of trust. The keeper watched the hill. The wharf confirmed. The shops adjusted. Visitors felt the ease without knowing why. When the routine stopped, the town did not just lose weather notes. It lost a shared way of moving together. Maris read the ledger at the chandlery counter, then closed it with both hands, resting on the cover. We thought the festival got smaller because people stopped caring, she said. Maybe people still cared, Jonah said. They just stopped receiving the same signal. She looked toward Finn, who was asleep beside a basket of coiled rope. He kept receiving it. The ledger changed the way people spoke about the whole project. Before they had called it Jonah's weather idea, or Maris's lighthouse plan, or Nella's flexible schedule. depending on who was annoyed at the time. After the ledger, they saw names they recognized. A baker's note about moving rolls closer to the east window. A boat painter's note about polish drying better after the north shift. A florist's note about which flag meant outdoor buckets would hold their color. The system had fingerprints all over it. Mr. Keene made copies of the pages and invited business owners to add family memories. That could have become sentimental fast, but the town kept returning to useful details. Where did the flower stand sit? Which lane drew people toward the wharf? What time did the bakery open when the green flag flew early? Jonah watched the notes gather and realized the town was not trying to recreate one perfect past day. It was rebuilding a shared habit of noticing. Finn helped in his own strange way. During the memory afternoons at the library, he moved from table to table and settled beside whoever was speaking most quietly. People who had arrived with half a story often remembered the rest after resting one hand on his back. A retired shopkeeper recalled the mirror glint. Theo remembered his uncle checking the flag before launching the maintenance skiff for demonstrations. Bram remembered being sent to buy extra flour on green mornings, though he claimed he had been too busy to care. The most useful note came from a woman named Celia Rowe, who ran a small print shop 2 streets back from the water. She brought in a faded order form for festival handbills. At the bottom, in tiny type, it read, "Opening times may shift with Lighthouse morning signal." The phrase settled the last argument. The flexible window was not a new inconvenience. It was how the event had introduced itself for years. Nella took the handbill copy, placed it in her binder, and said, "Well, that saves us from acting original." Jonah laughed before he could stop himself. The sound startled him a little. Finn lifted his head, confirmed nothing was wrong, and returned to accepting attention from Celia. In the weeks that followed, the lighthouse shed changed without losing itself. The town cleaned it, repaired the roof, labeled the flag tray, and installed a plain wooden desk for the morning log. They did not turn it into a shiny attraction. Nella insisted on that. The place needed to work. Visitors could look through the doorway during open hours, but the desk remained for observations. Each morning, whoever held the volunteer rotation wrote wind, visibility, tide, and harbor notes. Jonah trained them, using the old logs and new forms Mr. Keene designed. Finn attended the first 4 training sessions, then began napping through the explanations, which Jonah took as his review of their competence. The town also moved Greyhaven days from a rigid fixed opening to a flexible harbor window. Flyers gave the date and a morning update plan. Shops agreed to receive flag and text signals. Vendors liked it more than expected because uncertainty written down felt less personal than uncertainty whispered at dawn. Bram at the cafe grumbled until his sales doubled during a North Bright market, then claimed he had supported the idea from the beginning. Jonah did not correct him. Some victories are not improved by perfect memory. As summer deepened, Jonah found his own routine changing. He still wanted quiet, but he no longer confused quiet with absence. The cottage remained quiet. The hill was quiet. The signal shed was quiet, even when it was full of purpose. What had weighed on him before was not sound. It was the feeling of having no useful place to put his attention. The lighthouse gave him a place, but Finn had brought him to the door one morning in August. For years that would have annoyed him. Finn stood beside the bed, patient but pointed. Jonah dressed, made coffee, and opened the cottage door to find a note tucked under a stone on the step. It was from Nella. East Clear Green likely by 9:30. Your turn to sleep once. Jonah read it twice, then looked at Finn. They do not need us every morning. Finn wagged his tail once, and started up the path anyway. That became the ending Jonah had not known. He wanted not to be indispensable, but to help a routine become sturdy enough that others could carry it. In the Navy, a good watch handoff meant the next person had what they needed. In Greyhaven, the handoff came with flags, tied notes, coffee stains, and a dog who still inspected the shed as if the entire town depended on his nose. In September, the town held a small ceremony to reopen the signal shed officially. Jonah tried to stand at the back. Maris pulled him forward by the sleeve. Mr. Keene read a short history, not too short because librarians have their own tides. Nella thanked the volunteers. Theo presented a new brass hook for the flag lines, polished by half the waterfront. Bram brought pastries labeled green flag buns, which Jonah privately considered too much, then ate two. Finn received a plain leather tag engraved with Greyhaven's signal dog. Jonah thought that would be the part that made people laugh, but the applause was gentle, almost serious. Finn sat through it with the calm of a dog who had always known his rank in the matter. Jonah said only a few words. He thanked Maris for the key, Mr. Maris, Keene for the records, the committee for testing before judging, and the town for letting an old routine speak again. Then he looked down at Finn. "And this dog," he said, "for insisting that a locked door was not the same thing as an empty one." That line stayed in Greyhaven longer than Jonah expected. People repeated it whenever they found some old habit worth checking. A locked cabinet in the community hall, a schedule in the ferry office, a recipe file at the church kitchen. Not every search led to something useful enough did. By the following June, Greyhaven Days no longer felt like a fading event. It felt coordinated, the opening window adjusted with the morning. The flags moved with purpose. Shops planned around the tide. Visitors took photos of the lighthouse, but locals looked at it for information first and beauty second. That shift pleased Jonah more than any compliment. On the first morning of the festival, Finn led Jonah up the path before dawn. He stopped at the shed door, sniffed the vent, walked to the flagpole, and faced the harbor. East breeze, mist lifting, tide turning, mid-morning. Jonah wrote the notes in the log, then paused before adding the final line. Finn sat at pole calm. It was not an official category. Mr. Keene would probably object. Jonah wrote it anyway because the old keeper had understood that useful records sometimes needed human details, or dog details. At 9:28, Maris called from the wharf. "Harbor confirms." Jonah clipped the green flag to the line and raised it into the clean morning air below. Awnings opened, shop doors swung wide, and people began moving toward the water as if answering a signal they had been waiting years to hear clearly. Finn leaned against Jonah's leg. Jonah rested a hand on his back and watched the town receive the message. He understood then that following did not make him smaller. It had made room for the right answer to appear in its own time, first through a dog's patient route, then through records, then through people willing to look up at the same hill again. The lighthouse had never stopped mattering. The shed had never been empty. The records had never been only records. They were a map of attention kept by people who knew that wind, tide, timing, and trust could hold a harbor together. Jonah had come to Greyhaven looking for a quiet place to disappear into routine because Finn kept visiting the old lighthouse. He found a routine that brought the whole town back into rhythm.